Theater is about lots of things. Theater is about telling stories and relating to our own history and making sense of it, but it's also about making sense of what's happening to us today. As opposed to just being a reflection, I think it can be an exploration and a commentary on what's going on in our world.
Theater in itself is kind of a conservative art form. It doesn't really change very rapidly, and yet it does. For me, it's more about how are we going to find what the modern theater is? How are we going to strive to make theater that we would want to see?
But people also want a chance to engage in a communal way while exploring the events that are happening in our lives currently, looking to explore that. Theater is a different kind of visceral, communal, experiential happening. This kind of theater is devising. I heard the expression of devising later than I had already been devising. I think that word is relatively new.
I actually don't really like that term all that much, but it seems like it's entering the lexicon at a rate where I can't fix it.
The most basic description of devising is that the writers of the theater piece are also the performers.
Devising means writing plays from the stage.
It's different than traditional theater where one single playwright writes the play that then gives to a director that then casts actors.
So bucking the old model where someone goes into a room by themselves for a number of months, perhaps heavily drinking.
And then they hire a director, and then the director gets a bunch of designers and they work together, and then the actors come. It doesn't work in that pyramid form.
When you're working on a traditional piece, you have a set role. You are the director, you are the actor or actress, you are the lighting technician, you are the stage designer, set designer.
Whereas in devised theater, it's more of a horizontal structure. The designers, the writers, the actors, the dancers, the performers, the singers
are all introduced at the same time in the project and can all commingle and interact and influence each other as the process develops.
So the collaboration is on a much grander scale.
It's not created in a commercial factory sort of way. We get all the pieces together, we create this machine, and we send it out into the world. That's what a lot of commercial theater is like.
Because I think we're so used to like Broadway and musicals and big budget things, and we're used to spectacle a lot of the times. Like that's what sells. But what we've seen here a lot of the times is it's less, it's minimalist.
A group of theater artists who are more theater generalists as opposed to specialists as a playwright or as a director or as an actor. So they take off their specialized hats, they become theater artists, and they collaborate to investigate a question.
Using all of the elements of the stage in an interdisciplinary way so that actors become directors, directors become actors, designers get involved, and we all kind of get into the soup together.
And they all co-write the piece and then co-perform it.
So we might decide that this movement piece is really beautiful, that was created in response to this subject, and then we should find words for it. So we might try these words, and we don't like them, and we might try another set of words.
It's a lot different because there's a lot more fluidity to it.
You don't just take up a script that somebody else has written and perform that script.
There's no script that you work off of. It's material that you create yourself, and it's collaboratively created.
That means that we are interested in narrative, for one. We're interested in story. We're just not starting with the story.
The words aren't the most important thing, right? What's important is the idea.
There's nothing more than an idea when you start. It's basically just something. And it could turn into a show and it could not.
And usually that has to do with an element of social justice. So they see a problem of social justice and they begin to respond to it theatrically and try to open it up and explore it.
You come up with a concept or a starting off point. Ours was the American family. You begin to research that, and then you begin to explore movement and the combination of the two to weave a story. And it's not going to be a linear story necessarily from a beginning to a middle to an end.
And work to strive for new theatrical form, for new ways of expressing that are uniquely theatrical.
And it's all on a horizontal level rather than a hierarchy.
I kind of like to think of it as a buffet where everyone brings their own dish to the table, you know, and your final plate, your final meal is a little bit of everybody's contribution.
Like a potluck dinner.
Potluck dinner.
Potluck dinner.
Devising can have as many different styles as regular traditional theater can, so it all depends on the style of the company of devisers. They dictate for their piece what style will best communicate their message to an audience. So a devised piece can be absolute realistic, or it can be absurdist, or it can be expressionistic, or it can involve elements of all those different styles.
Realism and naturalism is a late 19th century development. There was a lot of theater before then, and there's been a lot of theater after then that has been different.
Experimental theater has been around, of course, forever, for generations and generations, and they called it something else in the 60s.
And in the 60s, they really turned that whole model on its head. They didn't care about narrative or story at all. What they wanted to do was just be an event.
So I think devising is really important because it's where the future of theater is heading. There is an environment in the student community that really feels excited about this kind of work. For a lot of professors and community members at Bucknell, what they told me was really touching and viscerally affecting to them in a way that they hadn't felt before. They liked the honesty of the students' voices, they liked their commitment to the work, they liked the physicality of it. I think devising is where theater is headed. I think it's important that the students not just know what it is, but they also know how to create it, how to create something themselves and really use their own voices and really committing to it and trusting the process, whatever the product might be.
Devising seems to imply some kind of end result, some kind of end result of what the theater is like in the end.
This is not a process for people who know what the end result is going to be. If you already know what the answer is, if you know what the end is, then you can't do this kind of work.
You know, you kind of figure out your goal as you go along and what the shape of the piece is, and that's really exciting.
As actors in America, in most theater schools, you are taught to be the center. You are taught to attract attention. You are taught to use your emotional life to illustrate the story.
Your body, your image, yourself, that's what you're trying to sell. In the traditional American system, it's all about going to the auditions and trying to get people to hire you. So you're always kind of in this place where you're struggling with ego, trying to be the best and creating, the best view of yourself. So you get trapped in that.
So you are asked to drop all of that and allow the other elements of the stage to stand alone, and for you as an actor to support them.
And once you work in this way, and once you start working with other people who are working in this way, a lot of the stress of creating goes away.
Do whatever it takes to make that light moment work. Do whatever it takes to make that costume moment work. And it's hard to not want to inject yourself because that's what you're taught to do.
But you have to kind of put aside your own ego and look at your contribution to the group as something that's necessary and needs to be shared, even if it's hard to share.
When you allow the theatricality of the moment, rather than the actor-centric moment, but the theatricality of the moment where everything in the stage is working together to work, it's magic, and it's beautiful. There was a woman named Mary Overley who illustrated how she was developing her work through something called 6 viewpoints. And she was a teacher of Moises Kaufman, who's the artistic director at Tectonic Theater Project, and myself. And we learned these techniques from her rather than having the text or a story. What it does is allow each element of the stage to stand alone.
Using all the elements and tools that you have at hand at really any given time on stage.
Working with the elements of the theater, like you never get a chance to do that. To just spend an hour examining height in space. That's cool.
So you work on costumes and you play with costumes in light, or you play with light as a character in and of itself, or you play with props and find the poetry in each of those props. And you work with these things individually and see what comes out of that, what resonates with whatever idea or theme you're working with.
The basis of this program is learning Tectonic's moment work.
Moment work is a technique developed over time by the members of Tectonic Theater Project to explore theatrical form in a space.
It's taking theater, breaking it down into its most basic parts, and then taking those parts, exploring with them to create new moments to see on stage that haven't been done before.
At its fundamental level, it is a technique for theatrical exploration. Moment work was developed from the idea that the old model of writing theater was, we felt at Tectonic, unsatisfactory. We felt like it bred a kind of naturalism or realism that TV or film was better master at, and also wasn't particularly interesting to us as furthering the story of what theater can do.
Moment work is defined, I think, in the Laramie Project as a unit of theatrical time. So it could be anything.
A moment is defined in this technique by, in essence, very simply saying, I begin, and you say, I end. And between I begin and I end, they're like bookends. Something happens, and whatever happens in between those bookends is the moment.
And then Andy was the first one to start it, and so he said, okay, so I'm going to do a moment. I'm going to go on stage, and I'm going to say, so he went, I begin, and then he kind of went, and then he went, I end. Like, that's a moment. That could be a moment, you know?
Those moments can be very simple, or they can be very complicated. And when you first start out, it's good to make them very simple.
Your moment doesn't need necessarily preparation because your moment is the exploration of it, and that can be you know, an improvised, unique event that happens that's unplanned, and sometimes those make some of the best moments. Or your moment can be, you know, highly planned with a lot of details and sequencing put into it.
But eventually what you find is each moment has to have dynamic change. Something in the moment has to happen that is surprising or different, or has to further whatever story is inside that moment. They can be layered or with other moments, or with other images or sound or other things, elements that you found. And then they can be sequenced, and you can put them in any order and find out, you know, what's happening.
You take a motion or physical action, layer that with text. Sometimes you layer two physical actions on top of each other with text that correlates to both of them. And then you have a moment. You say, I begin, and then you say, I end, and then you put those vignettes together to make your story.
You start discovering that there are lots of stories in there, and then you can hone what the story is that you want to tell.
As far as moment work goes, it sort of made me interested in directing more, because last year at our intensive we got to kind of design and create our own moments, and that was something that I had never really been able to do before.
It was very much about editing and watching what someone had made with kind of this eye of what does this moment right here want, or what does this form really want, you know?
Moment work, which has given me confidence as an artist, you know, in all these different ways. And it has been just a total blessing, and it's a gift that I hope that I can give other people.
And that basic thinking to more grand scheme thinking is so effectual in almost any type of theater that you can do. It can broaden your horizons and create new ideas all the time.
We have used those techniques to then develop bigger projects like Gross Indecency, or like the Laramie Project, or like 33 Variations, and The American Family, same thing.